Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today we've got more training camp previews on the way. Talk a little bit about the Michael Floyd suspension, which was 4 games, if you haven't happened to miss that news. We got a couple Twitter questions to handle towards the end of the show, and then we thought that we'd finish up with a Take 5 on the best TV shows of all time, given that Game of Thrones returned. For those of you out there that do like that show, I know it's kind of a big event for some people, and for other people it's kind of like...
Not for me. Not so much for me.
Well, regardless, let's get the advertising out of the way then real quick, and we'll hop into this Vikings football stuff. Brendan Gay, Chicago-based comedian, will be having his first recorded special at the Joke Joint Comedy Club on August 10th. You can get your tickets at BrendanBeingBrendan.com or thejokejointcomedyclub.com. Get a 40% haircut, courtesy of us here at the About the Labor podcast, using the promo code Brendan, BRENDAN in all caps. Make sure to join us out there. There's 2 shows, so no excuse for you guys not to be there. It'll be a lot of fun. I'll be there. And, so let's hop into this Vikings football stuff. Michael Floyd suspended 4 games. This isn't something I don't think we'll spend a whole lot of time with. I think this is kind of one of those expected things. I mean, we all knew that Michael Floyd was going to be suspended. Drew, any thoughts? This provoke anything for you? Is this kind of just the end of the Michael Floyd thing?
It's what we expected. I mean, this is kind of what we expected. I think especially after this latest kind of breach in the house arrest, this is kind of what we expected was 4 games. I think maybe the kind of initial expectation was 2 games, and then the house arrest breach kind of added 2 more games to it. But anything short of 4, I think, would have been kind of a shock. But 4 games is what we thought, and this kind of gives Laquan Treadwell or whoever, I guess it may be, earning that extra roster spot because of Floyd's suspension. A little bit of a tryout with the NFL here to see whether you'd be earning a spot on the roster in Minnesota or earning a roster spot somewhere else. So there'll be, Floyd's suspension will give an opportunity to someone here. And we'll see if I'm going to be looking at for sure the whole Treadwell-Floyd debacle. I actually have I put together the wide receiver primer for training camp for Vikings Territory coming up. Should be up on Monday here. So I look at that pretty closely because I think that's going to be something really fun to watch in training camp. And it's also going to, it's one of those training camp battles that'll leak into the regular season, which doesn't happen very often. But that's kind of that's my summation of the whole Floyd situation.
Yeah, see, the Floyd situation, first of all, I think a lot of us are pretty sick of it. Most people are probably about done listening to the debates and kind of the speculation surrounding the Michael Floyd situation. One thing that this suspension does is it makes it official that it's over, right? It puts an end to whatever this has been. Obviously, if Mike does something else stupid, then we'll be right back where we started. But for now, this is done. This puts an end to it. Mike can finally get out of being buried by the media as he has been as of late. So that's good for him. He can focus on football. But the real takeaway here is what you said, Drew. This opens up 4 weeks of regular season play for somebody. I think we talked about this a little bit during the wide receiver preview show, that it's probably going to be someone like Isaac Frichte who makes the roster because Mike isn't there. You'll see guys like Laquan Treadwell have every opportunity to lock down that starting role. That's the biggest thing for me right now is the fact that Treadwell basically has this spot on lock, and it's up to Mike to prove to the coaching staff that he even belongs at all. And he has a shorter amount of time to do that because of this suspension, because Treadwell is going to be the day one starter at that X spot just because of this, because of his suspension. So he's kind of starting himself off in a hole, which, I mean, he was already sort of in a hole when he came here. Obviously, there was, when he signed, he was in. This is the pit of Mike Floyd's football career to date. So he's only really dug himself deeper, and I think it's a good. It's a fun storyline to see if he'll be able to come out of it because at this point, he's so deep in it that if he is able to make it back out and be a productive player once again and turn his life and his career around, that'll be one heck of a storyline to follow, not just this season but into the future as well.
Yeah, I think from an off the field standpoint, it's kind of the one thing that's most important here is the whole. I don't know if I want to label him as an alcoholic. I think that'd be. We don't know him well enough to do that, but he's made some mistakes in the past that suggests he might have some sort of issue with it. So that part obviously is the number one priority here. And then if that gets turned around, then being effective on the football field comes, and then I would assume the way his talent, the way he plays, his experience with playing on playoff teams and just recently winning a Super Bowl can obviously be a big help with the Vikings and this young group of receivers.
Absolutely. It is kind of weird to think that Mike Floyd would kind of be the veteran of this group. I think even including Jarius Wright, he's the oldest guy in this roster.
They were the same year, I believe, same draft class, 2012.
Yeah, so he does bring veteran guidance. I mean, the same way that people talk about Case Keenum and how he's important to have on this quarterback roster because he's the only one that has any experience starting beyond Sam Bradford. Michael Floyd's kind of a similar situation, right? I mean, he's the only one beyond Diggs and Thielen, and then obviously Jarius Wright that have any significant reps as a starting receiver in the NFL. And if Wright, for example, is cut, all of a sudden you get so much younger at the position, and it becomes that much more important to have guys in your roster with experience and also postseason experience. People take away from Mike Floyd the fact that he wasn't on that roster because he wasn't active for the Super Bowl game against the Falcons. So, but he was still with that team. He understands, I'm sure, how to get there, given that he watched firsthand a group of players in New England that prepared their way to get yet another ring. So that type of experience is you can't put a price tag on it. So I suppose we'll see how that really translates. But for now, it's nice to finally put this scandal behind us. And I'm sure Mike is probably feeling the same way, that he's just glad to be done with it and glad to be a little bit out of the spotlight for now so he can focus on football. So let's focus on football as well. Let's talk about the tight end position, Drew. This is the position that I feel like over the last couple of years with Norv Turner, it was a main focal point, given that everyone knew Turner's history with Antonio Gates, guys like that in San Diego, where he made a name for his big play receiving threat tight end down the field. And then obviously Shermer takes over last year. We still see Kyle Rudolph have a major breakout season, and then the Vikings also add another tight end of kind of the receiving variety in Bucky Hodges with that 6th round pick. So the tight end position it's not going away in Minnesota. It's clearly still a very important spot. I just mentioned 2 of them. We got Rudolph and then Bucky Hodges as well. Rhett Ellison is no longer with the team. As we've talked about in the past, that's somewhat of an addition by subtraction thing, since we do lose his father, Ricky Ellison, in the process. So there is that.
Yeah.
And then we bring back the David Morgan, the guy that, obviously a late round rookie from last season that produced at a strong enough level that the Vikings felt very comfortable allowing Ellison to walk. And for, I would assume, for Morgan to take on that Jim Kleinsasser position that Drew loves so much. Then rounding out the depth chart at the bottom here, we got Kyle Carter, Nick Truesdell, and then Josiah Price, another Michigan State guy. So, Drew, what's your thoughts on this depth chart here, and any initial projections, predictions, bold takes, whatever it may be?
Well, I think, I don't think there's going to be much of a competition for a roster spot here. I think your 3 guys are going to be Rudolph, Hodges, and Morgan, and I think, although I am intrigued by Truesdell, he's the Arena Football League player, I believe, right?
Right.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by him because I believe he's 28 or something like that coming in. So I'll definitely be watching him when I'm at camp. But I wouldn't expect either of Price or Carter or Truesdell to really compete for a roster spot, other than a practice squad spot and or a spot with another team. But I'm mostly going to be looking at how Hodges and how Morgan are used. And we kind of alluded to something similar with the running backs, how McKinnon is used, how Murray and Cook are used, and how Shermer puts them in and plugs them in. So I'll be looking for that, because we know how Hodges at Virginia Tech was such a weapon, not lined up in line, but rather out split out, either out wide or in the slot even sometimes. So I'll be looking for that. But I think the three guys from the tight end position that are going to make the roster are pretty set in stone for me, between Rudolph, obviously what he did last year, and then Hodges and Morgan.
Yeah, I think you make the obvious point here that the tight end position is essentially resolved like before it really even begins, right? It seems like the bottom of this depth chart, particularly Price and Carter, are camp bodies at its finest. I don't think either of those guys really has a whole lot of potential, but they are, guys fighting for roster spots. And anytime you bring in guys that are fighting for roster spots, they're going to give you good reps, and they're going to make your team better. So it's important to have guys like that on your training camp roster. But as far as making the regular season roster goes, Drew hit the home run there. It's Kyle Rudolph, it's Bucky Hodges, and it's David Morgan. I don't really think there's any way around that. Truesdell, like Drew said, is an interesting guy, very athletic talent that not a whole lot of film on him, so there is some unknown there, and he could surprise some people. And the Vikings aren't against keeping 4 tight ends on their roster, so it's not, I don't expect that to happen, but it's possible given that the team has done this within recent memory here. But like Drew said, the big thing for me here is what's the crossover for positions for Bucky Hodges? What is his impact of likely kind of making the roster? How does that impact the wide receiver position? Because obviously, like Drew just said, Bucky Hodges really isn't a tight end. We've talked about this on the show quite a bit here. But the fact that he is kind of more of that split end type and not an inline player, how does that affect what the Vikings decide to do at the wide receiver position? We talked about a little bit how Isaac Fricke is probably the candidate to make the roster because of the Floyd suspension. But if you have a guy like Bucky Hodges, maybe you're more comfortable keeping one of the other guys, R.J. Shelton, for example. Maybe you see more potential with him and you feel comfortable having a backup split end on your tight end depth chart.
Or,
so that,
maybe you don't even go receiver at all. Maybe that roster spot goes to a different position on defensive side of the ball or something.
Yeah, exactly. So that's probably the most intriguing part here is will the Vikings, would they tip their hand enough during training camp and then into the preseason to, give us an idea of what the plan is for the roster composition? Because I do think that this position is fairly set in stone, but at the same time it does have some carryover qualities in other positions because of what Bucky Hodges can do and because of just how important David Morgan's role is. And just this position is essentially it's set, but we don't know enough about how that will ripple effect in other positions just yet, and that's something we'll have to keep an eye on during training camp.
Right. I mean, because if they're going to use Hodges as, in the same way that Virginia Tech did, I mean, the way you laid that out, I don't think they need to give that roster spot those first 4 weeks to a receiver, because Hodges essentially is that, and he will be playing the same type of role that Fricke would. So I think, if Hodges shows an improvement as a blocker, in camp, and can prove that he can play the tight end position and not just be labeled as such while playing the receiver position, then I could see that roster spot going to an Isaac Fricke or maybe even a Jarius Wright for those first 4 weeks. But obviously Hodges is kind of positionless. Where he doesn't have a position, I guess, right now. He's labeled as tight end. If he gets to actually be playing tight end more often than he's playing receiver, then I think that's kind of what the Vikings are going for here. And obviously David Morgan too. He's positionless, but in a good way, because he can actually fulfill all these different positions. The H-back, the fullback, the tight end. He can line up all different sorts of roles, and he can, that Jim Kleinsasser role that you referred to. It's one of my favorites. The guy that jack of all trades can do whatever. I think David Morgan's the next guy to do that. I think he showed last year at camp some soft hands that are still a bit under the radar due to some injuries last season. So I like the Vikings tight end situation quite a bit as long as Hodges can prove that he can block. I think there's a solid trio there and a lot of different skill sets that can combine to be a really solid trio. Yeah,
I was just going to bring up the point that you brought up about David Morgan's soft hands. I don't think we give the guy enough credit for being a potential vertical option, right? Rhett Ellison was always fairly limited to being essentially a blocking tight end. Sometimes he'd slip out on a short flat route, something like that. But for the most part, Rhett Ellison was who he was. When he was on the field, it was to basically to add pass protection help or just to add a thumper to the running game. David Morgan, I think, adds a different dimension in that he can be more versatile with your route tree. He can run good routes. If you check out his film from when he was in college, I mean, he was one of their better receiving weapons, not just a blocking option. This is a do-it-all tight end that maybe isn't getting enough credit because he comes from a smaller school and because he didn't get too much tread on his tires during his rookie season. But I would keep an eye on David Morgan because I do think that he does get a little bit overlooked just because he hasn't been a flash player to date, but I think that he does have the potential and the physical frame, the natural athleticism to be a flash player, whether that's in the red zone situationally or just basically picking guys off when they're expecting him to block and instead getting a one-on-one mismatch with the linebacker downfield. That's something that he could offer, and will be something I'll be keeping an eye on for him during his second season to see what type of progression he goes through as a tight end. Will he become more of this Rhett Ellison style, Jim Kleinsasser-esque blocking tight end, or will he have a more expanded game? Will he be a more well-rounded tight end that Pat Shurmur feels comfortable running two tight end sets in? Because all of a sudden Sam Bradford has a ton of offensive weapons, especially at this tight end spot where Hodges, Rudolph, if Morgan takes a step, Diggs, Thielen. I mean, that's a lot of different combinations, a lot of schematic stuff that you can do to really neutralize what the opposition is giving you. Essentially, if they have poor cornerback plays, you trot out your three receiver sets all day and get after their cornerbacks. If they can't cover tight ends with big linebackers, then you got your three tight end set to work in, Hodges and Morgan and Rudolph and just, destroy them in that way. It gives Pat Shurmur a lot of options if these guys do develop in the way that, we think they have the potential to do.
I think that's one thing, too, to look at is how little Pat Shurmur used more than one tight end on the field. There was a stark difference, at least in my, from what I saw, between Norv Turner, especially not just in 2016, but I think the first, his first couple of years as well with the Vikings, where he would put out, two or three tight ends sometimes in sets. Obviously, it was, we had the run heavy sets in 2015 with Peterson in the backfield, and he would put out three tight ends out there, but I think Shurmur it seemed like he almost wiped that out of the playbook altogether, and it was just a lot of Rudolph with three receivers, with Diggs in the slot, that type of thing. So I wonder, that'll be another thing to look at too, is how often the Vikings work on, multiple tight end sets. Obviously, they don't tip their hand very much in training camp.
Right.
We get that in preseason as well, but just from knowing Shurmur's experience and what he's done in the past, he's generally not a guy that's going to use a bunch of tight ends. So that's another thing to look at here too. And I mean, there's been some. I think in the past the Vikings have kept four tight ends before, but that's almost completely impossible given what Pat Shurmur does, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say you're probably onto something there, given the level of importance that Pat Shurmur has put on the position. It becomes that much more black and white, right? So at such a black and white position, a position that we here feel that it's pretty set in stone. Give me one major takeaway here before we move on to the offensive lineman. What's for people going to training camp that are interested in kind of analyzing from the bleachers? What is something that you would keep a real eye on with regard to this position?
I think for me, I'm going to be looking at Bucky Hodges as a blocker. I think we know kind of the raw ability he has as a receiver, that kind of go up and get it ability against really any size defensive back. But as a blocker, he's extremely raw and not, he's definitely not there yet as an NFL caliber blocker. So moving him inside, I assume is what the Vikings would like to do. And for them to be able to do that consistently and trust him, he's going to have to really show up his technique as a blocker. So that's what I'll be looking for.
Yeah, that's a great one, and I'll leave it right there. I think that's probably the number one thing to keep an eye on during training camp is really just to simplify it even further, just Bucky Hodges, the player, keeping an eye on how the Vikings use him. The blocking is the number one weakness, as Drew mentioned, the number one reason why he may not see the field early on in his career is because of that blocking limitation. So that will be the number one thing to keep an eye on. But just as a player, this should be a very fun guy to watch. I think that you'll probably see some highlight reel plays from Bucky Hodges. He does have that spectacular catch element to him. So keep an eye on Bucky Hodges. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I think that we've talked about this on other mediums, but probably the favorite to win the Mr. Mankato Award as well for those of you who are watching it. Bucky Hodges should enter with the best odds, but we'll see what the 1,500 odds makers decide on later on here. Let's move on to the offensive line. Obviously, this is a position that we've been talking about all offseason, pretty much all of last season as well, because of not only its importance, but just how obvious it has become that the Vikings can't play or couldn't play effectively with the product they had on the field last year. So the progression is going to be, it's so important. It's really the number one thing for this team to get beyond 8-8. This offensive line needs to progress. With that comes the ripple effect. Everyone knows how this works. I just find it so funny that the only time that the offensive line is really highlighted in the media, on podcasts, whatever it is when it's failing, right? You never hear anything about the offensive line when it's playing well, unless it's playing so well that it's like generational, like we're talking about Dallas. But think about like Green Bay, for example. They don't get nearly the hype they deserve for the amount of, protection that they give consistently to Aaron Rodgers. So I do think that this is an overlooked position as a whole, just because it's very boring, and really the only way you do notice it, unless you're looking for it, is if they're playing poorly. So, offensive line, let's start with the bookends. Obviously, two new guys here, Riley Reiff and Mike Remmers, will be watching to see how they transition to the NFL. Other than those two guys, kind of some no-namers on here, and then Rashad Hill, who is another guy that I've talked about before. I think he's the forgotten man on this offensive line because he flashed in Week 17 when most Vikings fans had tuned out. But you got him. You got Reed Fraggle, who I'm not very familiar with, admittedly. And then Jeremiah Searles, everyone knows he's my favorite player on the team. And then, of course, Aviante Collins, who is a guy that I've talked about quite a bit as being a better guard candidate than anything, but he's currently listed on the Vikings offensive tackle depth chart. So that's just one storyline right there off the top, before we even get started here. Watching to see how the Vikings use guys like Collins, Isadora as well, younger guys who are coming in for their first training camp. How will they be used? What type of reps will they be getting? And basically, how big of factors will they be for the Vikings during their rookie seasons? Drew, what are you seeing from this depth chart?
Well, I think you highlighted the offensive tackle with Riley Reiff and Remmers as the additions. Right there, you're cleaning up quite a bit of the issues I think the Vikings had to deal with last year. TJ Clemmings and Jeremiah Searles, I'm sure they're fantastic people, but in the context of the NFL and what it takes to be an offensive tackle, I just don't think they didn't have it. They didn't have it. And Clemmings, his circumstances are a bit weird because he's been shifted like 4 times to different positions.
He's actually shifted back now. He's going to be at guard during this training camp.
So I don't know, but I'm very intrigued by Rashad Hill right now. I think that's kind of the hot takeaway of what to watch for the offensive line in training camp, because obviously too with Pat Elflein coming in, I think he'll be another one to watch too, just as a rookie and a third rounder that's kind of seen as a very pro-ready prospect. But Rashad Hill had kind of that one coming out party in the Week 17 game that didn't really mean anything, but I was against some talented players in Chicago, and he really had the best performance from an offensive tackle throughout the season. So I think watching him and seeing if he's can produce at that level consistently, and against like an Everson Griffin on that side, if he holds up against Everson Griffin consistently in training camp, that would be a cool storyline to look at, because all of a sudden the Vikings have solid depth at the offensive tackle position, which would be kind of cool.
And on top of that, too, going off of that point is, Mike Remmers is certainly an upgrade over TJ Clemmings, or Jeremiah Searles for that matter. Either one, whichever one, obviously he'll be on the right side, so technically we're talking Searles here. But he's not necessarily like a lock to start at that position, right? He comes in as a fluid fit that can be a swing tackle. He's proved in the past that he can play multiple positions on the offensive line. The Vikings are paying him accordingly. But Rashad Hill could easily prove that he is the better offensive lineman. So not only could he be a depth guy if he comes in and obviously, reinforces what we saw during Week 17 last year. If he comes in and plays very well, he could beat out a guy like Mike Remmers, who the Vikings have committed a solid amount of money to, but not enough to keep, a guy like Hill off the field if he is the better player. So that's one major storyline to watch here because, Hill is just going to, right now he's just a one-hit wonder. He's your baby got back, if you will. But he could easily be a very quality player that's, like Drew said, either a depth guy or, could end up being a major factor on the right side of or the left side of the offensive line. Maybe down the line you see Riley Reiff get shifted into potentially a more natural position at the right tackle spot if Hill is able to continue to be this very talented, kind of under the radar player that we saw, for about 50 snaps. This is a big opportunity for guys like Rashad Hill because the Vikings know what they saw, and they really haven't given him a whole lot of respect since, being that they did go out and sign 2 offensive tackles and then drafted a couple more. But that doesn't mean that they're not willing to keep an eye on Rashad Hill's progression, and if he does come in and show his stuff, I mean, why can't he start Week 1? I'm not putting it past him.
Yeah, I get what you're saying at the angle. I think the money that the Vikings committed to Mike Remmers has him slated in as the right tackle unless, an injury or something would happen.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't really like the money they gave him at all. I don't think Remmers is by any means, an above-average starting tackle. I think he's serviceable. It's kind of how I feel about Riley Reiff as well on the left side. But that's obviously, again, that's a lot better than what the Vikings dealt with last year. But I think Rashad Hill's ceiling in this camp, kind of what he can achieve, barring any injuries, is a solid backup at either side, on either bookend. Which, again, I think the Vikings really need something like that because depth has obviously been an issue for as long as I can remember right now. So I think we're focusing a lot of our time on Rashad Hill, but I think it's just because he's such a wild card that he's received all his hype after one game. And, nobody really knows past that.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it, too. He kind of is a wild card. Because, some people have given the Vikings kind of flack for not drafting an offensive tackle to build depth from what they did during free agency. And maybe, just maybe, the reason why they didn't draft him is because they feel comfortable with the depth that guys like Rashad Hill offer. Maybe they do feel comfortable with having, basically Rashad Hill being their swing tackle, their number 3 beyond Reiff and Remmers, and then also having Jeremiah Sirles, who has experience along the offensive line, as being their top 4 bookends. Maybe that's the case. I guess we'll have to see. That's what training camp is for. Let's move on into this guard position. I mentioned Danny Isidora as well already. This is a guy that's going to have every opportunity to steal a spot from somewhere, but right now it looks like Boone and Berger are your starters at the guard position. I don't see that changing, but it will be interesting to see how guys like Isidora and then Freddie Tagaloa as well, who's was an offensive tackle at Arizona and sort of an interesting undrafted signing. We talked about him on the show in the past year being a very strong player that has some technical issues. And then on top of that, you've also got Austin Shepard, who has been on and off the Vikings roster for a couple of years now. Zach Kieran, who really, I feel like he's kind of a nobody. I feel like Zach Kieran's name never comes up in any context, whether it's the future, the past, whatever it is. You very rarely hear about Zach Kieran, but he remains in Minnesota. Like I said before, TJ Clemmings is also on the guard depth chart, at least to start training camp. We'll see if he can kind of have a career rebirth inside. And then Willie Beavers, everyone's favorite 4th-round pick. He's looking at a do-or-die season to some degree as well, given the lack of progress he has shown in his short time in Minnesota. Really starting to make the people who mocked the Vikings for selecting him over some fairly talented players, making them look pretty good so far. So what are you seeing from this guard depth chart, Drew? It seems like Berger and Boone are the guys that are going to be starting this season.
Right.
But beyond that, there's probably still some storylines to watch for sure.
I think the one is Danny Isidora. I think him starting at least at some point here, let's say, I think for sure he's the kind of projected come-along starter for 2018, assuming Joe Berger retires. So his kind of development and how he performs in camp will be certainly a storyline to look at. And I also will look at TJ Clemmings. I mean, moving inside to guard, another position switch for him. But he's certainly a powerful and a strong athlete. I don't think anybody was doubting that. So maybe this is what he needs, just to move inside, less kind of thinking, I guess, maybe on the inside there, and you're not going up against freak athletes all the time. Not the quick athletic types like your the Leonard Floyds of the world, even in Chicago, or the Ezekiel Ansahs or whatever it is. Instead, he'll be dealing with not as quick, but obviously stronger, which maybe suits him better. So that's another thing to look at too. And obviously Pat Elflein as a rookie coming in. With that center battle, it isn't necessarily, that's not decided yet. The center battle with Nick Easton there. I'm assuming Elflein will win it, but Nick Easton's the incumbent there. He's the favorite, so
which is weird.
It's the favorite for now, yeah. But I think Elflein's talent and his production at Ohio State kind of it should over time prove itself, and he'll be the starter. But those are kind of my takeaways as of now.
Yeah, we've talked about this in the past. The Vikings' interior offensive line, not that bad. Alex Boone is a former borderline Pro Bowl type player that didn't have a great first year in Minnesota. But we've seen guys in the past, like Captain Munnerlyn, for example, that come to Minnesota, and it takes him a year to kind of shake the rust off and get into a groove in a new place. So
I think Linval was kind of like that too. Right. At least 2015, he really stepped up.
Yeah, Linval definitely was a different player in his second season with Minnesota. Maybe Alex Boone is a similar circumstance. We could see him take a step forward, and especially with some continuity on the left side alongside Riley Reiff, I'm sure that'll help him out quite a bit. Joe Berger is an interesting scenario, though. Obviously, we know that he's a very stable player. He's been arguably the Vikings' best and most consistent offensive lineman over the last couple of years here, but he does shift back over to guard, so there are some question marks there. Will he, is this a better fit for Berger? I don't know. I mean, he was very, very solid at center. But the Vikings are obviously, they're thinking about the future to some degree with guys like Elflein, who they expect to be very promising and, essentially take the corner very early on in their career. The Vikings could easily have a very, very strong interior offensive line. Like I'm not talking just above average serviceable. I'm talking plus quality talent. That's three players that can really get it done in Boone, Berger, and Elflein. And that should rub off on guys like Reiff and Remmers. So, I think the number one storyline I'm watching overall here with this, this group is the TJ Clemmings one. I mean, we give that guy a whole lot of crap. Don't get me wrong. This show isn't, we're not trying to act like we don't. We've talked enough crap about TJ Clemmings as well. But at the end of the day, I think everyone can admit that they would rather see this guy succeed than continue to fail. And I would really, personally, I think it'd be a great comeback story to see, TJ Clemmings establish himself as, at the very least, a serviceable backup guard in the NFL and have a long career where, he's at least able to make some money and, become a professional, more respected professional than he has been to date, and not just a mockery of Minnesota and the NFL. So I'm going to be watching to see if he can really, take a step forward at a different position, and maybe with less pressure on him, he can develop more. He can develop better, and maybe he's the type of guy that just needs time to develop instead of being thrust into just a completely unfair situation for what it's worth. So hopefully that's what I'm watching TJ Clemmings. I'm hoping to see him take the next step, because it's tiresome to watch a guy fail so consistently, and there's not a whole lot you can do when you're failing that consistently and you have no backup. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. I want to see the light at the end of the tunnel for TJ Clemmings during training camp.
Well, I mean, there's been 2015. He's going into the season expecting to be a backup the entire season as depth. If Phil Lodeholt goes down with the Achilles, I believe, and he's all of a sudden he's a 4th or 5th round rookie starting the entire season as a right tackle on a playoff team. And then 2016 comes around, he's still in there at the starting right tackle position. Assuming more comfort level there as a second-year player. I don't think people expected too much from him still. But then the Khalil injury goes down or happens. Andre Smith was there too, actually, and he went down as well. Suddenly, the Vikings are out there starting tackles, and Clemmings is forced into left tackle. Which did he ever play there before that, or was they
I
literally
believe he was a right tackle at Pitt, and that was after he was a defensive end at Pitt. So I don't think he had any experience.
At all.
He has the frame for it and the athleticism, but experience, that was really the difference for him.
Right.
He just wasn't ready to do it.
Exactly. So, obviously, when we say in terms of NFL context, he was very bad, he was historically bad, comparing to left tackles that have played in the NFL. But I think the circumstances he dealt with were also historically bad. So I think getting, maybe guard is the right position, and he'll get a full training camp to work on it, and he won't be expected to be a starter or anything. So this should be a good situation for him. Barring any injuries here. I sure hope, Joe Berger doesn't suffer something and he's all of a sudden a starting right guard. But I think he can be a solid depth piece, and he's definitely got the athleticism and strength for it as well. So I think that'll be, if that's what Clemmings ends up being this season, that would certainly be a win.
I think I'm completely on board with everything you just said. I think the big thing that you just pointed out there is that a lot of people have lost absolute faith in TJ Clemmings over the last couple of years. And to be fair, you guys have a point. I don't think that he has earned any right to be optimistic about his career with his play to date. But let me throw him a bone here. This is a guy that is humongous, incredibly athletic, very smart and cerebral. If you listen to his interviews when he talks with the media, this guy really seems like he's a down-to-earth, normal dude that gets it. And I really think that to some degree, just taking some pressure off this guy's back. He's a young kid. He's 23 or 24 years old at the max right now, and the Vikings put a lot on his shoulders. So hopefully, eventually, we're going to see this natural ability and this natural frame take over, and he'll be able to take the corner. He's running out of time for sure, and like I said, he hasn't done anything to suggest that he's going to become the player that was once actually slotted to be a first-round pick. I know it sounds crazy right now, but this is a guy that had first-round projections on him before he hurt his foot and slipped to the 4th round when the Vikings selected him. So hopefully, this is a guy that has nothing left. It's do or die for TJ Clemmings to some degree, but the potential is still there. And that is something to really keep an eye on, because if it does unlock at some point, not only will the Vikings have more depth like we've been talking about, but another quality young player to fortify their offensive line for the future.
How many players at his age have had that much experience already in the NFL? He started 32 games, at two different positions. He's spent half at one, half the other, pretty much. That's very rare. So at least from that perspective, there's a lot to like about the obviously the athleticism, but also the experience he has gotten. Even if he hasn't performed, at a high level, he's certainly is gaining the experience and gaining more things to put on his resume. So I think now it's just finding the right fit and giving him the right time and preparation for that position. I think he can be just fine as at the very least a backup player.
Absolutely. So everyone jump on the TJ Clemmings train. Let's at least hope that this guy gets better here. The show is not trying to act like he is going to, but let's just try to be a little bit more optimistic with this guy. He's trying his best. It's got to hurt for him so much more than it hurts for us to watch him play. Just imagine being out there and just over and over again, you're just like, I got beat again. What are they saying about me on Twitter now? It's got to be just mentally taxing. So hopefully,
the About the
TJ
Labor
Clemmings
podcast is starting the TJ Clemmings bandwagon right now.
All right. Okay, Drew. So I'm under the impression, or excuse me, I'm under the understanding that we have some Twitter questions to answer for today.
Yes.
So why don't you roll those out at me, and we'll continue the show with that.
Yeah, our first one was actually a few days ago, but I reminded, this is from Josh Sweetland. I just let him know that we'd get on the next show here. He brings up an interesting situation here. He says he took actually 2 whole tweets to send it to us, so just we'll have to follow along here. But he said, would you rather have Barr bounce back to, I assume, 2015 form, and then Bradford plays just good enough to earn a long-term contract, or would you rather have Teddy get fully healthy and play as your starting quarterback, but Barr repeats the 2016 performance? That's the situation at hand here.
That sounds like a loaded question if I've ever heard one. I'm going to say the first case in this scenario, I think, because I do. Yeah. I mean, I'd rather have 2 players play well than just one. It sounds like just above average or good enough to earn a long-term contract would be good enough to also get this team into the playoffs, along with Anthony Barr as well, given that he was, prolific in 2015. And I think this defense really is the key to everything here. So I'm going to pick the improved defense and sufficient quarterback play over my love for Teddy Bridgewater in this case.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I'm assuming this comes from a hashtag Team Gloves member. By the way, Josh, you can pick up a Team Glove shirt on the Amazon Vikings Territory page. I'm sure you'll like that one. But I think that the deal here is if Bradford's playing well enough to get a contract extension, because first of all, I think the Vikings are playing this one very, very safe in extending Bradford here. From what we've heard, I think they've been very minimal talks about it on both sides here, because I think each side understands the situation here with Teddy and how unique it is. So for Bradford to earn that extension, he's going to have to play really, really well, I think. So that's what makes me kind of side with the first scenario here, where Bradford plays good enough to earn the long-term contract and Barr bounces back, because Anthony Barr was phenomenal in 2015. So it would be very fun to have that Anthony Barr back as well. So
absolutely, I'm fully on board with getting Anthony Barr back on the same page with 2015 Anthony Barr. Because, man, just think about the player that he was and kind of the step we were expecting to see him take, combined with guys like Danielle Hunter. That's so much pass rushing talent. If you're trotting Barr, Griffin, Danielle Hunter, Eric Kendricks, who, like I said before, has shown that he can pass rush as well, with Harrison Smith, you don't know where he's coming from. That's a lot of defense. Absolutely. Let's get Anthony Barr going again in 2017. On the next question here, Drew.
Yeah. Our friend Eli, he actually does some Vikings work for Last Word on Sports here. He's asking for a little bit of a preview into our cornerback primer here, which we can give a little hint at it, but he's asking what we think about the last cornerback spot. Because I think what he's assuming here is that Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, Terrence Newman, Mackenzie Alexander, and Marcus Sherrills are the 5 that are going to be on the roster already. Yes, the cockroach Marcus Sherrills will not be cut. Let's not even start that discussion.
No, we don't even talk about that.
He's thinking about the number 6 cornerback spot, who we like and why we like him. And I'm going to go, and I'm just going to say right now I like Trey Robertson.
Yeah, I was just going to
say that guy. But Jabari Price too. He's kind of been. He hasn't really done himself any favors, but he does have a lot of talent, and I think either him or Robertson should be the favorite to get that last spot there. But I think Robertson, he had too good of a camp last year to not be the favorite for that 6th spot, in my opinion.
It's got to be difficult to cast that guy aside once again, right? I mean, Robertson came out of virtually nowhere and showed that he belonged last training camp. He was turning heads all last, July, August, last summer. He was incredible, and he came out of nowhere. I mean, this is a guy that basically an undrafted player that was an unknown on a very, very, very strong cornerback depth chart, had virtually nothing to lose, and went out there and did his thing. So how can you not be in Trey Robertson's corner?
He was also, I think Robertson was a quarterback, I'm pretty sure, in college, wasn't he? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Trey Robertson was a quarterback, like in college at Indiana. So that's even more impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a guy that, how can you not be excited about his potential after what he showed last season? And the big thing here, the big difference between Price and Robertson, other than the fact that one of them has a ton of off-field issues and the other one doesn't, subtle note there, is the fact that I think that Robertson has the opportunity to be an outside cornerback in the NFL, whereas Price is kind of stuck being a slot guy, which to some degree is in his, favors him a little bit because the Vikings do have such limited slot depth right now, with Terrence Newman not exactly being a slot cornerback, at least over the last couple of years. Mackenzie Alexander being the guy that's kind of slated to be in that role, and obviously Captain Munnerlyn no longer with Minnesota. The Vikings do need some depth at that slot spot, but at the same time, Price is too small of a player to really offer, high-end potential at the cornerback position, whereas Robertson showed last year that he has the physical frame, the natural instincts, and he learns on the fly very quickly to suggest that he could be a very talented player for the Vikings in the future. So, obviously we're going to talk about the cornerbacks, I believe, next week on the show. But that would be my initial thought is Team Trey Robertson for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on board with that.
All right, so from there, let's hop into the Take 5. Like I said, we're doing best TV shows this week because for the Thrones people out there, myself included, winter has finally arrived, and so we thought we'd stay on schedule with that and, continue with the theme that we try to do as much as possible here. So give me your top 5 television shows, Drew. Both anything, it could be running right now. It could be something from 1995. I don't care. Give me your top 5.
Game of Thrones is not on here, but you'll sense some bit of a theme here, and then one of them is not like the others. So number 5 is Parks and Rec. Love me some Ron Swanson. My number 1 is very similar to this one. 4 is Friends. I think this show gets a lot of hate that I don't like because it's a
classic. It's an absolute classic.
Chandler Bing is a television character. Chandler Bing. So his one-liners are out darn near every single one of them gets me. So number 3 is the ESPN 30 for 30 series. Every single one of them is phenomenal. The production is awesome. The storylines are great. They keep you on the edge of your seat the entire time. And the 2-hour, I think the O.J. Simpson one was really good. They're obviously the Randy Moss one, if you haven't seen that one, is phenomenal as well. I could go on and on about which ones I love.
The recent basketball ones have been very good. Like the Detroit Pistons one, Bad Boys, and then also the One Shining Moment or One Magic Moment or whatever with Shaq and Penny Hardaway. I really enjoyed that one. And I'm not a basketball guy by any means, so I really enjoyed those.
I think Allen Iverson had one too.
Yes, no crossover. Yeah, another really good one.
And I loved Catholics versus Convicts too. That was really good. But
absolutely.
Number 2 is Impractical Jokers. I think more people need to know about this one. These 4 dudes are hilarious. It's on True TV, and I think the thing is they pull pranks on people just in public, and I think eventually they're going to get to the point where everybody's going to know who they are, so they're not going to be able to do that because they're going to be able to know what they're doing. But number 1 is The Office. Legendary. Michael Scott is my favorite TV character of all time. I've literally watched the entire show 5 times, going on 6 now, and it's not getting not funny anymore. They're still hilarious to me. So Parks and Rec, Friends, 30 for 30, Impractical Jokers, and The Office.
Okay, I like a lot of TV shows. I watch probably far too many of them, so this list is a little difficult, so I'm going to cheat quite a bit throughout here. So, a couple honorable mentions. Stranger Things is an excellent show, but it's so early on that it could fall apart next season, and then we'll never talk about it again. So honorable mentions for shows that are going right now that are pretty good to start at least. But yeah, so I'll combine Parks and Rec and The Office for number 5 for me because obviously the perspective, the point of view character where they that shtick that they do. It's virtually the same. Obviously, The Office and Parks and Rec are very highly regarded television shows. If you like comedy and you haven't watched either of them, I don't know what's the matter with what are you doing? Those are those are just great TV shows that I think that a lot of people they have a place in anyone's heart. So those are number 5 for me. Number 4. I'm going to go with Family Guy here. I think Family Guy is hilarious. I think that style of humor...
It should have been in my honorable mention.
that style of humor, it's very hit or miss. I mean, you either really like it or you think it's the dumbest thing ever. I personally think it's hilarious. I love that they make fun of everyone. It's like my dream to be one of the people they make fun of on Family Guy, because I think that's just such a hilarious style of humor that will never go out of style. You can always make fun of what's going on in life, and it's always going to be funny. So props to that show. Big fan of it. Number 3 for me is Friends. You see me defend this on Twitter. If you follow me, I'm a huge Friends guy. Like Drew said, I love Chandler Bing. I try to emulate a lot of my style of humor off of what he does because that guy is so freaking funny. And if you don't like Friends, what's the matter with you? There's like it's literally like the basis for what sitcoms are today. So if you like sitcoms at all, just know that it literally stole everything from the success that Friends had. That's what, it's everything is built off that show. So you are wrong if you don't like Friends. There's something wrong with you.
The ending to it is just perfect too.
Oh, it really is. They front to back. There was no stall, and they were doing all this while Matthew Perry had a cocaine problem. So good for them. They did a great job. That's number 3 for me. Number 2, I'm going with Suits. I don't know how popular this show really is. Suits is on USA Today. It's a lawyer show. If you know anything about me, I was planning on going to law school, and then I didn't because I wanted to write sports instead. So I'm a big fan of law stuff. I love all of that bickering and kind of... I think the drama... I like dramedies in general. I really like that combination because I like getting, I like shows that force me to watch it enough to know what's going on. Whereas, shows like Family Guy, you can just have it running in the background and, just hear the joke and, it's, you don't need to know what's going on to enjoy the show, right? So I like needing to be focused, but also getting a nice mix of comedy, and I think Suits does that. Harvey Specter is one of my all-time favorite characters across any TV show. So that's number 2 for me. And the number 1 is Game of Thrones. I love Game of Thrones. I'm pumped that it's back. I'm really, really, really excited to see the conclusion. Dude, I have all the theories in the world. I'm one of those people that, like I said, I like getting really absorbed into a TV show, trying to learn all the information and trying to come up with, my own ideas, my own estimations and plans like that. And Game of Thrones is the ultimate show for concocting just absurd theories that have no basis whatsoever and just, fans love them. I think the show is so much fun. If you're not into Game of Thrones, that's fine. I wasn't for a very long time either. I think it's somewhat of an acquired taste, but I am a huge fan. I think it's the best show of all time. That is my number 1. So, recap. Number 1 is Game of Thrones. Number 2 is Suits. Number 3 is Friends. 4, Family Guy. Number 5 was both Parks and Rec and The Office, with some special shout-outs to Stranger Things. And then Forensic Files is another show that I really enjoy watching as well.
I need to add, these are both Netflix specials that I really enjoyed. Obviously, Making a Murderer was fantastic. I think people need to watch that if you haven't. And also, The People vs. O.J. Simpson. The 10 episodes, I believe it was. I literally went through those in 2 days. I just binge watched them one weekend, and that was phenomenal as well. So I don't know if those count as TV shows because they're just little Netflix series, but those are both really good shows. So I would
shout out to Netflix, by the way. Netflix has been killing it with everything, but especially their TV shows lately. Like I said, Stranger Things is on the up and up. That's a show that if you're not watching Stranger Things, make sure to check that out because season 2, I believe, comes back this October. And man, that first season was something. Drew was just talking about binge watching a show in a couple of days. I knocked out Stranger Things in an afternoon. That show was just fantastic. I believe I called in sick for work one day because I wanted to finish that. So, big fan of that TV show. Drew, I believe we got your final take and then a sign out here, and then that's it for the first of our Wednesday, Friday week scheduling podcast thing.
Yep.
Jig.
Yeah, this isn't really, it's not going to be an extensive one, but simply it is for people that are driving, please use your freaking blinker, because there's nothing more annoying than when you're trying to turn right at an intersection and then you see a car that you're waiting for to go right past you. You're just waiting, you see it coming, and then it just veers into the road right next to you, and you wasted about 5 to 10 seconds just of your life right there, just sitting at that stop sign.
Yep.
And all it took was that person being so inconsiderate to forget to use the blinker. So please, drivers, I obviously I have encountered this problem way more in Minnesota than I have in South Dakota, and I'm not being biased or anything there. That's actually a fact.
There's more cars in Minnesota, to be fair.
True. Okay, we'll say per capita, I encourage the problem way more.
Bringing out the big words. He's serious about this one,
per capita.
Folks.
Yeah. So please use your blinkers.
I'm with you on this one.
I will be happy.
I'm messing with you a little bit because I think this is a hilarious thing because I've heard you harp on this so many different times. But I am with you on this. Just be anything you do, be consistent with it, right? I mean, blinkers, turn signals, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. Just use it. Like, why not? You know how easy it is to just.
I know.
It's like it takes 2 seconds, and on top of that, once you make your turn, it clicks off for you.
It turns off for you.
It's the easiest thing in the entire world, right? Okay, so I'm with Drew. I believe we're now 4 for 4 and agreeing on Drew's final take, so that's good. That's the end of the show. Like I said, our new posting schedule is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. With our Wednesday episodes being live shows on Tuesdays, we fully expect that will be a consistent thing. Obviously, we have lives and things will get in the way at times, but consistently we expect to have a live show every Tuesday at 8 p.m., which we'll post for Wednesday in accordance with Wednesday's show. So look for that. That's the plan for this week at least, is to start the live show thing on 8 p.m. on Tuesday this week. I think that's about it in terms of news about the show and stuff like that. Make sure to check out my guy Brendan. Brendan being Brendan.com, the JokeJointComedyClub.com. His special is on August 10th. Get your hair cut with the code Brendan, BRENDAN. And I think that's about it. So make sure to follow us on Vikings Territory, like Drew just way back in the beginning of the show talked about. We're working through our training camp series right now. So my quarterbacks preview is already up. Drew's Wednesdays goes live alongside this show, actually. So that will be there. And then you can see I'll have offensive linemen, defensive ends up later on this week. And then I believe Sean Borman and Austin Blyle will have a couple of different ones as well. So we'll be working through that ahead of training camp to make sure that we get every position covered in that regard. Otherwise, on Twitter, Vikings ATL Pod, myself, Robert Reidell, Reidell, Drew Mahowald, Mahowald, and then Vikings Territory at Viking Territory. Check us out there, and the next show will be up on Wednesday, and catch us live at 8 p.m. on Tuesday. Join us for the show, submit your thoughts, and we will talk about it right on the spot. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch you later on this week.